Gauche Commune and LSP-PSL to the struggle of the miners in South Africa. Like most left-wing people from my generation, first years of my political life had a constant attention and constant campaigning against the apartheid system and in support of the struggle of the ANC against the violent and racist apartheid regime. It was the struggle of the South African workers combined with a large international solidarity that brought the apartheid system down, and that gave great joy all over the world. But like the people from the Democratic Socialist Movement said already then, the leadership of the ANC defends its own interests before the interests of the majority of the population. In the interests of a rapidly growing black elite and in the interest of the bosses, white and black, in South Africa, laws were kept in place that now make it possible for the state to charge workers protesting with the massacre done against them. This is just one symptom of a brutal capitalist regime that remains totally in place, a system that makes every lasting improvement of the living standards of the working class impossible. The workers in South Africa haven't fought for decades, haven't given their blood, sweat and tears in order to get leaders as Zuma installed in power, just as the Belgian workers didn't campaign and didn't fight in the past just to have leaders like Di Rupo and Van der Lanotte in power. Gauche Commune supports the struggle of the South African miners. We want to let know to the South African bourgeoisie and the ANC leadership that we will respond to further repression with the building of a new international solidarity campaign.
Okay, the first point to make is that what's happened with the South African miners has demonstrated, yet again, has underlined the importance of international solidarity, where the protests that have taken place around the world, like this one, like protests in Ireland, like other protests in Belgium, have had an impact in putting pressure on the ANC government, and is one of the reasons, together with the upsurge of rage and anger within South Africa itself, that the charges against the over 200 other workers, comrades of those who were massacred, that those charges have been dropped. It's an incredible situation where an ANC government can use apartheid laws to attempt to penalise those who've been involved in protesting, peaceful protests, alongside those who've been massacred, and can attempt to charge those with murder. It's a graphic indication of how far to the right the ANC has travelled under President Zuma, that they're now using these apartheid laws against working class people in South Africa, against struggling miners. It's also a graphic indication of how far to the right they have moved, that in reality the state forces in South Africa, the police in South Africa, are now effectively being used as private security guards for these major mining corporations. Many of the same mining corporations that were present and supported the apartheid government, including Lonmin itself, which is the company involved here. There's a section of the left, and also definitely a big section of the international media, which has portrayed what happened in Marikana and what's happened in South Africa as a complicated issue. That what's at dispute here is a complicated inter-trade union dispute, that there's a lot of violence from the workers, and that therefore it's complicated. We shouldn't be protesting in solidarity with the South African miners. We shouldn't be attempting to put pressure on President Zuma. The reality is here, from the point of view of us, from socialists, is that things here are very, very clear. There's no complication here whatsoever. What you had was a justified strike of workers for decent wages. Currently they're on poverty wages and decent working conditions. They currently work in extremely unsafe conditions. Those workers were met with brutal repression, with the state, the police forces working hand in hand with the leadership of the NUM union and sections of COSATU, the Trade Union Confederation. And those workers were brutally mown down, many of them running away by the police. All the evidence now suggests that that massacre was pre-planned, premeditated. That evidence is the type of weapons that were brought by the police to the protest, which were not the usual weapons. They brought automatic weapons, the type of barbed wire used, and many of the meetings that took place beforehand. So a premeditated massacre of workers engaged in strike action under the leadership of the ANC government is an illustration of how far they have gone. The other very shameful feature of the ANC's role in this is personified in the person of Cyril Ramaphosa, this former leader of the ANC, this current leader of the former leader of the NUM and still a leader of the ANC, sits on Lonmin's board, this mining company. He's one of the major shareholders, and he's an illustration of the fact that a section of the elites within the ANC have enriched themselves at the expense of the mass of working people within South Africa. This man last year, he bid 19.5 million rands to buy a prized buffalo, at the same time that the average wage in South Africa is 26,000 rands a year. So you have the complete enrichment of a tiny section of people at the top of society and the continued impoverishment of the black masses. An indication that the aspirations of those who made the revolution against apartheid have been completely betrayed. One of the results of this massacre is that has become much clearer to a wider section of people within South Africa that that's what has taken place here. There's a big politicisation taking place within South Africa and a big struggle obviously around the question of the mines. The other thing that's clear is the power of working class people. The international press is shaking in its boots at the prospect of the strike spreading, which has already happened from the platinum mines to the gold mines across the whole mining sector, the impact that that can have on the world economy. The miners in particular and the workers generally in South Africa have a huge amount of power which has to be mobilised in order to be able to get a genuine trade union inquiry from the bottom up into the massacre and to have justice in terms of wages and condition. That requires building forward, which is happening, for a generalised strike across the mining sector and across the South African economy. The other issue that is posed is obviously the need for another revolution to actually achieve what those who fought against apartheid were fighting for, which was not only political equality, equality in theory, but equality in reality, which can only be achieved based on taking the resources out of the hands of the tiny minority, the mines, the natural resources, into the hands of the public, democratic public ownership, and planning them in the interests of ordinary people. Thanks very much.